welcome back to our final session today. So let's now dive into the universe of green banks. Data shows that there is a growing movement of green banks activities across the globe. So what are green banks? What are their missions? How do they function? And what are their mandates? To start with, let's watch together a video of the co-authors of the State of Green Banks 2020 report, Angela Whitney, manager of the climate finance at the RMI, the Rocky Mountain Institute, and co-director of the Green Bank Design Platform, and Kareem Arslan, director of the Green Finance Institute, the GFI, and the co-director of the Green Bank Design Platform. Take a look.
My name is Angela Whitney from RMI. I'm a co-author of the State of Green Banks 2020 report, which was written by RMI, the Green Finance Institute, and the Natural Resources Defense Council. The State of Green Banks 2020 report is the first global survey of green bank activity. It includes both the activities and impact of existing green banks and the work being done in countries interested in setting up new green banks or transforming existing organizations into green finance institutions. The report shows a growing movement of green bank activity across the globe and is meant to be a tool used by policymakers and financial institutions to support green bank developments globally. A green bank is a specialized financing institution or a separately managed facility that acts as the focal point for scaling domestic investment in climate solutions. A green bank can take several forms, but all green banks are motivated by a public purpose, accelerating low-carbon, climate-resilient, and sustainable development. Most, though not all, green banks surveyed in this report have public ownership and largely public capitalization. These institutions have a mandate to use their limited public capital efficiently to mobilize private investment. Therefore, green banks can help countries achieve their nationally determined contributions and sustainable development goals by collaborating with other financial institutions also seeking to increase green investments. Green banks can tap into new sources of domestic capital, such as pension funds and sovereign wealth funds, and international sources like multilateral development banks and climate funds. Analysis in this report shows that existing green banks have been able to use their relatively small amounts of seed capital to mobilize many multiples of additional investment. The data and findings in this report are based on surveys RMI collected between June and September 2020. We received 46 surveys and conducted 15 interviews with representatives from 36 countries.
And I'm Kareem Arslan from the Green Finance Institute, also a report author. There are 27 operational green banks around the world in 12 countries. To date, these institutions have invested over $20 billion in technologies ranging from rooftop solar to vehicle electrification and energy efficiency. In order to attract private investors into these markets, green banks use a range of financial instruments which allow them to mitigate risk and often be the first to invest in new technologies and geographies. These instruments include debt, equity, guarantees, and credit enhancements, among others. On average, green banks have been able to attract $2 of private capital for $1 they invested into a project. To date, nearly 70% of existing green banks are in high-income countries, but as you will see, the interest in relatively new green bank model is rapidly expanding to countries at all income levels. There are 25 countries exploring setting up a green bank. Interest exists in all regions and across all income levels. Depending on the country's national context, what financial institutions already exist, and other market conditions, countries are exploring either setting up new institutions, creating facilities within existing institutions, or transforming already operational financial institutions. Green banks in these 25 countries are being set up to attract private capital and concessional finance, as well as to achieve NDCs, with the expectation that they will also improve air and water quality and help economic development through job creation. Green banks will offer the full range of previously mentioned financial mechanisms to address local market gaps for low carbon and climate resilient technologies, informed by the needs of project developers for viable projects that will be bankable in these new green sectors. Despite strong interest in setting up green banks worldwide, there are barriers in establishing these institutions. Main obstacles include availability and access to finance and political will.
Governments and financial institutions are working hard to unlock investment to meet climate and sustainable development goals, and some progress is being made. Green banks offer an efficient way to overcome market barriers and channel investments into low-carbon technologies, thus accelerating global alignment with the Paris Agreement. However, green banks cannot come into existence in isolation. Governments, international development banks, national development banks, bilateral aid institutions, and climate funds can support green banks. They can do this through 1. Co-investing alongside green banks into low-carbon, climate-resilient projects. 2. Providing seed funding to capitalize a green bank. 3. Providing technical assistance to spur the establishment of green banks. And 4. Promoting green banks as a tool to help achieve NDCs and SDGs. To read the report, follow this link or visit our website.
Reach out to any of the report co-authors to find out more about green banks, the report, or how we can collectively support green banks as an institutional solution to financing a global low-carbon transition.
And without further ado, I would like to welcome the moderator of our next panel discussion, Ms. Ryan Mary Thomas, the Chief Executive of Green Finance Institute, the GFI. And on the panel today, we have Teddy Mugabo, the Chief Executive Officer, Rwanda Green Fund, FONERWA, Mohamed Sayed, Specialist of Climate Finance Unit, Development Bank of South Africa, DBSA, and Susana Escaria, Secretary General for the Environment and Climate Action Portugal. Hello, Ryan Murray, and thank you for joining us, and hello to all our panelists.
Thank you very much. Obviously, delighted to be here this afternoon on the day that we launch our report with the Rocky Mountain Institute and the NRDC, and also on the day that Mongolia has launched a new green bank. So this is really a fast-moving and exciting area of green finance, and I'm delighted to be joined by Teddy, Mohamed and Susanna to share their experiences of setting up similar facilities in Rwanda, in Southern Africa and in Portugal. It's only a short panel we have this afternoon, so I'm going to leap straight in with some of these questions. And I'm going to start with you, Mohamed, and asking, what will the climate finance facility within the Development Bank of Southern Africa do that doesn't already exist in your marketplace?
Thank you so much, Ryan, and thank you so much for the organizers for inviting us just to present our experience within DBSA and trying to set up a facility, not only in South Africa, but also in other Southern African countries, including Namibia, Lesotho, Eswatini, and obviously South Africa as well. So in terms of the uniqueness of CFF, essentially what the Climate Finance Facility aims to do is to fill market gaps and crowd in private capital by targeting projects which are deemed risky in the climate mitigation or adaptation space. Could be new climate technologies, for example, which are commercially viable but cannot currently attract a market rate at scale. So the whole intention of the CFF was set up to crowd in and catalyze commercial funding and to support, these private sector projects across specific areas within the mitigation and adaptation space. So it's not meant to compete at all with existing commercial banks. And in fact, if you look at the investment criteria for the CFF, additionality is obviously quite key, where if a commercial bank is in a position to fund 100% of the project cost, then there's no need for the CFF. So we would only fund up to 30% of the project cost, with the intention that in the form of credit enhancement, as was shown in the previous slides, mostly tenor extension, subordinated debt. And the idea is, with that credit enhancement, we are able to de-risk these climate-related projects and allow senior debt from commercial banks which would be the the dominant funding. So up to 50% of the project cost should be senior debt from commercial banks, as well as 20% of equity finance. Thank you.
Teddy, thank you so much, Mohammed. So the CFF playing a valuable role as a credit enhancement vehicle and a catalyst for further private finance in the South African market. So which I'd like to turn to Teddy with a similar question in, what will the Rwanda Catalytic Green Investment Bank do that doesn't already exist? And particularly in the case of Rwanda, how will it be different from the Rwanda Green Fund, which already exists under your leadership?
Yes. Thank you very much. Just maybe if I can take you back a little bit. So right now, what we're trying to establish is actually a Rwanda Green Investment Facility. So we're not yet there to the point where we want to establish the bank. And I believe there are also other questions later on that we'll be tapping into this. But really, the idea of the investment facility is to address some of the gaps that exist currently. And you asked the question very well in basically asking how will this be different from the Rwanda Green Fund. Currently, the Rwanda Green Fund is only able to mobilize grant funding. We therefore see the Rwanda Green Investment Facility as a new window to tap into private sector investments. Because when you look at the current structure, but also the law, we're not, as a fund, as a government fund, we're not permitted to attract loans, which is why we therefore believe that with the establishment of the investment facility, we'll be able to do so. I'd also like to, I believe it's the reason why we want to establish this is also very much in line with what Mohammed just said. The current financial landscape in Rwanda is very conservative in that the commercial banks they find the green projects risky and a little bit, if I may say, reluctant to fund projects that are within the green sector. So with the facility, with the Green Investment Facility, we therefore want to showcase as a proof of concept, which will be used basically to build a track record, but also showcase that there is a need for commercial banks to actually start, also going into the green sector aspects. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Teddy. You're right. There's a lot of points there that I'd like to come back to, but I'd like to bring in Susanna at this point and just better understand how the National Promotional Bank in Portugal will collaborate and complement existing institutions in your country. I'm afraid I'm not going to try and butcher the pronunciation of the bank in Portuguese, but Susanna.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation and welcome, Teddy. Thank you so much for this. And our Green Bank was created last September this year. And this week, the management board was approved. And in this case, this is a particular Green Bank because it merged. Several financial institutions are already in place. They are going to be one only, and our Green Bank is called Banco Português de Fomento, and is going to be like not a retail commercial banks, but is going to be as a European investment bank at national level. And the main concern of this bank is to give capacitation and consultancy to the commercial banks. So it's not a competition, it's a direct competition to the commercial banks. It's in the upper level and try to give some advice in managing the risk regarding the investments projects that have some particular emphasis in the environment assessment. So this is the main focus of this bank.
Technologies or sectors, or on how it will implement the NDCs for Portugal?
it is not well completely the main sector, but in this case is like a business area of the Banco Português de Fomento. So is in kind of this green bank business, it's going to support and give consultancy and advice in the areas of sustainability of the investments, like energy efficiencies, like climate change mitigation and adaptation, like the sustainable development. So water treatments and every kind of investment goes to not significantly any harm to the environment, and is a broad framework to deal with.
Perfect. So a broad framework, not a sector-specific mandate.
Yeah.
I guess the same question to you, Teddy. Is sector or technology-specific or agnostic across different sectors?
So yes, we do have a sector specificity, but before going to that, I would also like to address that we have a revised NDC with a very ambitious target to reduce carbon emission reduction by 38% by the year 2030. And so this has already, within the NDC, there's already an identification of sector priorities, including sustainable cities, clean transport, we're looking at waste management. So to answer your question, yeah, we are actually developing this facility, the specific sector focus areas that have been identified that are in line with the NDC. Thank you.
That's fantastic to hear the news about the tightening NDCs. And I'd come back to some points you made earlier, but I just wanted to ask the same question of Mohammed, whether the CFF has any specific technologies or sectors that it focuses on or not.
Yeah, certainly we are sector specific as well. And the reason for that is that we try to limit this facility, which is obviously housed within the Development Bank of Southern Africa, within the DBSA, to the core mandated sectors of the DBSA, simply because we wanted to leverage on the existing expertise which exists within the bank. So our bank, we focus on energy, water, transport, ICT, as well as water. So what we decided to do in establishing the CFF, we decided to obviously focus on those sectors where we believe we could make a significant impact in terms of contributing toward the NDC targets for our geographical mandated countries. So in the sectors that we looked at energy, so we look at renewable energy efficient projects. We look at transport, which is obviously a for the DBSA. So any clean transport project, or mandate, as well as waste to energy. And on the adaptation side, we've decided to focus purely on water, and especially because of the DBSA's focus on water as a key infrastructure area. So what we find is that CFF would support the DBSA's commitment to promote the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as well as the NDC targets in these specific sectorial areas I've just mentioned. So we decided not to make it too broad, and just try and take advantage of what sector expertise we do have within the bank in order to launch this phase of the CFF.
Thank you for that. I think we lost you a little bit there in the middle, but got most of your points there, Mohammed. While your signal is still strong, I'd like to ask you another question. We're taking a different tack now and talking about the capitalization of the CFF. There are obviously a number of different models, and we highlight them in our report. But I'm just interested in your view on whether certain capitalization options are better suited to certain setups and certain environments than others, whether you have a view on that.
No, absolutely. I think from our perspective, and again, it may not be necessarily for other developing countries, we used our accreditation with the Green Climate Fund, which is obviously quite a large UNFCCC finance mechanism, to try and obtain a concessional loan from the Green Climate Fund. And the partnership with the GCF was certainly very key in capitalizing the CFF. And what we then did was blend the concessional finance from the GCF with our own funding, which is obviously a bit more expensive. But whatever concessionality we get, has to be passed on to the beneficiaries. So in the case of the climate finance facility, it's largely capitalized by the DBSA and the Green Climate Fund. So we've got an approval of 55 million USD, which was matched by the by the DBSA. And we also have credit lines, green credit lines from multilateral banks, to kind of support the sub-projects as well. So although those credit lines are not there to set up the CFF itself, but they would target the sub-projects that this facility would then support. So in our experience, the GCF and these climate finance mechanisms, was quite key in terms of establishing this dedicated climate finance facility.
So the GCF played a key role there. I'm interested in Teddy's view as well on capitalization in Rwanda and what your view is on optimal model.
Thank you very much. It's actually really, really good to hear what Mohammed has to say, because we're slightly behind. We're actually right now starting the capitalization process for our Rwanda Green Investment Facility, and we're also targeting the Green Climate Fund. However, because FONERWA is not accredited to the Green Climate Fund, we're actually using the AFDB, so the African Development Bank. And so what I would maybe like to say here is that the main variable that is also driving us is obviously looking at the highly concessional loan that the Green Climate Fund has to offer. So because at the end of the day, we're trying to basically make the environment more conducive and be able to attract private sector investments, but also interest the private sector to really move into the green sector direction. And therefore, it's important that the money we mobilize is highly concessional, so that at the end of the day, the interest rates which will be applied will be more attractive compared to the commercial rates that are offered by the commercial banks. So I think we're still in the process. We've just started the process by the concept node level, but the Green Climate Fund has been identified as the source, at least to tap into this highly concessional loan.
And obviously, we wish you all the best through that process. And Susanna, coming back to you, you mentioned earlier about the EIB, and obviously you've been working with them, particularly around green recovery and green taxonomies. How will that collaboration inform your green bank strategy, and in particular supporting the COVID-19 recovery, which is obviously such a timely consideration at the moment?
Our green bank, the Portuguese Banco is mainly public funded, but the ideal it was a private public funded. Regarding COVID, we mainly is public, the fund, and we have established a strategy in the short run for this particular year, and in the medium term, a strategy that is based on public funds and European funds. Taxonomy is going to be applied in these sectors. Mainly, we are going to pay attention, and we are going to incentivize the investments and to protect all the sectors that are going directly to promote the resilience and to the climate action, the protection. So our main concerns are the sectors and the entities that are going to work directly to energy, water, mobility, adaptation and mitigation to climate change, circular economy.
Well, Susanna, I think we missed a few of your comments there due to the line, but hopefully we got most of that.
Sorry.
No, not at all.
Do you want me to repeat?
No, I think we got most of it about your green bank strategy and how you intend to look at different areas of the economy, and especially your final point about the circular economy, which is good to hear.
Yeah.
If we might go back to Teddy, Obviously, you're at a really exciting juncture in applying for your funding and setting up your organization. And I just wanted you to talk about your future ambition for the organization.
Thank you very much. So I think everything really draws down from the NDC, the recent NDC that has been revised. So we have to mobilize 11 billion by the year 2030. So that really has a lot to say to the fund, considering that we have to play the biggest role in making sure that we attract this climate finance in the country. And therefore, we do believe that we cannot do this by only continuing to work the way we've been working, which is attracting grant funding. This is where we have realized that we need to be innovative, but also think about how we can tap into private sector investments. And that's where we believe that the Rwanda Green Investment Facility will play a key role. One, in making sure that we diversify the current instruments that we have by actually tapping into highly concessional loans and also providing different products to the private sector in Rwanda. And I think something maybe I'd like to say here is that the current structure we're looking at for the Green Investment Facility is that so FONERWA has actually approached the Development Bank of Rwanda, like I mentioned, and the idea is to have is for the facility to have two windows or two arms, if I may say. And so it will have a project preparatory facility arm, which will be sitting within the Rwanda Green Fund. So we basically keep doing what we do best, mobilize grants, and then use them to blend the loans, to basically make sure that at the end of the day, we're blending the grants with the loans. And then the financing arm will be sitting within the Development Bank of Rwanda. So again, the other reason why we felt the need to do this is that the project preparatory facility will be providing, preparatory funds basically to different projects, whereby they can graduate from ideation to incubation and eventually to bankability, which we then therefore transfer them to the financing arm of the bank. Because there's several issues I think it is important to note, looking at our current market, did a market assessment, and where we wanted to really understand what are the challenges, be it from the commercial side, the commercial banks, but also the private sector players. And you find that one, the commercial banks are, like I said earlier, they find this sector too risky, or it's just a new sector that they haven't previously worked in. And then they also, and then when you talk to the private sector players, they also need funds for the feasibility studies to make sure that the projects are bankable. So we believe that with this structure in mind, where we will be supporting the ideation and the different life stages of the business life cycle, we believe that it would play a significant role and hence also help us to achieve our NDC. Thank you.
So really looking at that project life cycle and recognizing that this isn't a quick or easy fix. It really does need consideration right across that value chain. That's fantastic. I just wanted to ask a similar question to Mohammed as well, the future ambitions for the CFF.
No, thank you. So I think firstly, part of the reason for establishing or embedding the CFF within the DBSA was to try and obviously mainstream climate finance within the bank. So we want climate to be part of the key criteria for making investment decisions around infrastructure, especially a sustainable infrastructure. So apart from achieving the very important targets set out by the various countries in Southern Africa and beyond, in terms of the NDCs, we're also trying to use the CFF as a means of ensuring that as DBSA, we are able to mainstream climate finance. So our intention is to obviously scale this facility, beyond the 4 targeted countries. We chose ZAR denominated countries simply because for ease of operations during this initial phase of demonstrating hopefully the success of the CFF. And based on that, we are currently looking at expanding this model to other countries, especially in SADC countries where we have a very strong kind of network. And our intention is to collaborate with national DFIs in those countries. So we are engaging with GCF once again, but I think we have to demonstrate that the CFF can work. We still at implementation phase, in these 4 countries. So hopefully next year, we will be in a position to host a workshop together with the UNFCCC office, and just to get a sense of what are some of the gaps and some of the challenges faced by some of the national DFIs in supporting NDC targets in various SADC member states, and how can the CFF model or the Green Bank model assist these DFIs in contributing towards those targets. So we're hoping that with this catalytic phase of the CFF, we are able to expand and replicate this model across the region.
So effectively replicating some of the GCF support that's given you in order for you to set up, and you're sort of paying it forward by then doing it in other jurisdictions.
Cool.
That's cool. Then Teddy, and I was going to come back to you before asking Susanna the same question, that as you're thinking about establishing your green bank, what have been some of the main considerations when deciding whether to create this new standalone institution or transforming an existing one? I think it's a really key question given some of the other panel discussions today.
Yeah. Thank you very much. So I think actually I said it at the beginning. We've decided to create a facility first before establishing the full-blown out bank. And the reason for this, I believe there's different aspects. The first one is that we did a scoping study where we were basically looking at the best way in which the Green Bank can be established. And that means that basically looking at ways in which the Rwanda Green Fund can graduate and turn into a bank. And that would actually require for the existing law that puts in place the fund to be revised. So that was one of the sort of setbacking, because it's something that would require time, considering that we can only attract grant funds and are not able to apply loans. This would basically require us to revise the law. That was one aspect. The second is around building a track record of a facility before creating a new institution on its own. So after several stakeholder consultations, and this involved talking to our Ministry of Finance and the National Bank of Rwanda, and basically key stakeholders that would be involved in setting up the bank, it came about that the policymakers felt the need to first, create a facility within existing institutions, which would then build a track record. And once that is ready to be transformed into a bank, it would make more sense, because I believe the dangers are that sometimes you create a new institution and there's so much that is required, as looking at the technical capacity, all the governance structures. So in a nutshell, those were some of the aspects that were considered. So to build a track record, and also try to fast track the process, because if we're going to create a bank, it's something that might take years, and probably 6 years from now. But if we go the route of having the facility, we can start doing something, and in terms of generating the pipeline, testing it out, and then once everything has been proven, the bank would be ready to be established. But also convinced, because like I said, there's several stakeholders involved, and again, our sector is seen as a risky sector. So by doing this, then people feel more confident that the bank would actually have there would be an added value of the bank. So that's it on from the side of Rwanda. Thank you.
Could I ask a follow-up question? Because you mentioned the broad range of stakeholders that you need to get involved. And clearly here in the UK, we've just started having conversations about setting up a new national investment bank that would have sustainability and green as a core principle. Have you got any suggestions or tips of how we can actually get all the right parties around the table to have that conversation?
So I'm not exactly sure how the UK in terms of the different institutions in place, but I believe that a key stakeholder is honestly the Ministry of Finance. So I don't know how it's set up in the UK, but I believe that the Ministry of Finance has a very key role to play in this, as well as on the side of Rwanda, we have a national bank. So the National Bank of Rwanda, which determines the establishment of different marks. So those have been the two critical stakeholders. And so maybe a tip is that it's really important that they're involved at every step. And that's what we've done. So from the scoping study work that we did, they were involved, and so this is good because you're able to have high-level policy decisions at every step along the way, instead of going ahead and working on something and then once you present it to the decision makers, you might just waste time. So I think it's very important that stakeholders are involved along each step. And that means, whether it's identification of the sectors, it's very, very important that it's linked to the NDCs. So having that national priority aspect is very, very important. Thank you.
So emphasizing the importance of collaboration there, absolutely. And Susanna, you obviously mentioned earlier that in creating the new bank, it's acted as an umbrella vehicle, pulling together some other banks or organizations. So what were some of your considerations when you decided to go that route as opposed to creating another standalone institution?
Yeah, I'm fully agree with Teddy. And it took 5 years to merge these entities. And the reason it was because they are from the Minister of Economy side. So they have to negotiate with the Minister of Finance and Central Bank of Portugal. So that's why we took so long to have this green bank. And this bank, the reason for merging the bank was scale, to have funds and to have scale to fund the investment. So it's very important to negotiate since the beginning. And in the case of this green bank, the reason to have the merger was to get scale to the investments and to fund the projects. And then also we want to become neutral carbon into 2050. So to become neutral carbon, we need to support huge amount of investments. And otherwise we could not do it. And we have to also to have the private sector aboard. So that's what's the reason to do this.
Thank you. And then I guess Mohammed obviously went down a very different route, setting up the facility within the existing DBSA, and your considerations for going down that particular route.
The first one is, of course, as I mentioned before, we're trying to mainstream climate finance in our decision-making process, and the idea was to try and we've got also a climate change policy framework where we have certain targets in terms of mitigation and adaptation. So having a facility embedded within the bank, would help transition the DBSA's core business and having green and climate change considerations in the investment decision-making process. I think that was, one of the key reasons. The other reason, of course, is to keep the cost of setting up the facility to the bare minimum. And again, it links to the earlier question around the sector focus. So the idea was to take advantage of what expertise already exists within the bank, whether it's on the sector side, but also, the credit expertise, the finance expertise that we have. But what we've tried to do is we've established a project steering committee for the CFF, where we would then have external expertise on where we have expertise around climate change matters. So they would assist in terms of ensuring that the projects fit the criteria from a climate mitigation or adaptation perspective. So if that expertise did not reside within the bank, we try to have that expertise incorporated into the project steering committee. So that's how we try to balance, the lack of, let's say, for example, climate change expertise, which may not have been there before setting up this particular facility.
Fantastic. So if I could try and summarize some of the key messages that I think I've heard from the three of you, is that clearly the green banks are all focusing on low carbon and climate resilient investment, but they're all tailor built to address the local market needs and priorities in each of your jurisdictions. And that means in many cases, they're built to accomplish multiple objectives, including, as Teddy mentioned, around the NDCs and the sustainable economic development. And they also, we haven't got onto the more social aspects yet of improving health outcomes, but from what you guys have been saying around some of the sectors you're focusing on, there's obviously an important social dimension as well. So I guess the key is that the Green Bank is built to fit the local market needs and not one size fits all. And then I guess the other point that has come across quite strongly is that the green banks can all have slightly different mandates through either looking at co-investment opportunities, helping source and create project pipelines, helping access climate funds. We heard that very clearly, and finance from other MDBs and bilaterals, and achieving climate and sustainability policy objectives. So it's very clear that these are very collaborative institutions that can work with existing development banks and existing public finance infrastructure. I hope I've done some justice to your points. If anybody would like to elaborate, if not, I'm going to hand back. I'm going to say thank you very much to the panelists, and thank you very much for your contributions to our report. We would obviously encourage everyone to go to the RMI website to take a look at that. And I will hand back to Asha in the studio. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ryan, Mary. Thank you very much to our panelists. So it's great to see this growing movement towards more green banks. So we need green banks, and I'm tempted to say that all banks should be green at one point. So thank you guys for your messages. It was great to have you here. And one special thanks to Ryan, Mary. It's very difficult to have this kind of panel discussion without not seeing anyone. I think you did a brilliant job. I was telling the other moderators during the past days how hard it must be to manage a panel like this without not seeing the people really physically. Well done to all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it was my great pleasure to host the final day of the Finance in Common Summit. Thank you to all the speakers and program contributors, and of course to our audience. And I hope that you enjoyed your day with us. I invite you to continue the conversation online on the platform. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Paris time to resume our discussions. The day will start with two high-level events focusing on the solutions to support the private sector in Africa and on the priorities to place the agriculture and food sector on a more sustainable path. The journey to discover the potential of public development banks will continue with sessions on a wide range of topics, from climate change to gender equality. So don't miss the plenary session starting at 4 p.m. tomorrow. Have a wonderful evening. See you tomorrow. And from the AFD and myself, goodbye.